worth thinking about. The Model T example is really interesting, um, except the Model T isn't driving the economy. So
Welcome to Stream, a truck-tractor-trailer.com production. My name is Zach Miller. I'm your host, and I'm honored to be joined once again by Andrew Johnston, who is the co-founder of TrueCore Capital. Andrew, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
absolutely, always a pleasure to join.
Yeah, and this is going to be a fun one. This is something a little bit different that we have for you today. We're going to keep this really conversational. And the topic we're going to be talking about today is electric vehicles, of course, specifically electric trucks and the infrastructure that's required to support those electric trucks. And, you know, I think and of course, Andrew is in California. I'm in New York. Those are two of the big states regarding EV and EV policy. And that's I guess, kind of where we begin with both the California, the CARB standard in California. New York is, I always get it confused if New York has already adopted it or if they're just putting the finishing touches on adopting it. You know, the New York bureaucracy is kind of tricky to get a hold of, but essentially the CARB standard is going to be the standard for any state that is looking at this. So I guess, Andrew, you know, with that, you're based in California. What are you hearing from some of your clients in terms of, you know, EV adaptation, marketability, just sort of what are some of the things that are thrown by you?
I've heard that it's going to be a big pain. I mean, quite honestly, you know, we deal with a lot of the trucking community, especially in California. They're not technically looking forward or particularly looking forward to converting their fleet. I think that it may be the step in the right direction from a climate standpoint, but it will be a large effort on everybody's side to make it happen.
Are they, have they said some of the specific pain point? Because I know one of the ones I'm hearing here is the range anxiety. You know, the range anxiety is a really big one in terms of the batteries. And I'm also hearing that the government credits are sort of problematic for some of these fleets to take advantage of.
Right. It's almost kind of the chicken or the egg argument, right? I think the main problem with the range anxiety is that, you know, the charging infrastructure or the electric infrastructure is not there across the country. You know, a lot of these people are driving thousands of miles. Especially as you get to the, you know, the middle parts of the country, charging stations could be few and far between. So the potential solve would be the government doing an infrastructure bill to make, you know, EV available across the country, but then you don't have any data about adoptability, or will the truckers even convert, especially if it's not legally required by their state. So California is another story, right? But what about every state that isn't legislating that?
Right, exactly. And I think that's one of the interesting things. Like I was at an EV showcase about a month, 6 weeks ago. And it was, you know, in terms of what the OEMs are doing, it's outstanding. I mean, the products that are either out right now or coming to market very soon really are great vehicles and really cool looking vehicles too, to be honest. But somebody, because this was a question that was brought up, right? What about the infrastructure? What about, you know, the range anxiety? And somebody made an interesting point about how, okay, but, you know, people started buying, you know, Model Ts before there were fueling stations all across the country. You know, people were interested in a new technology and they went ahead and bought it, and the rest sort of followed suit, which I think was a really good point and a really interesting point. But I think it's just not, it's not an apples to apples comparison. And I would, my only thing is, I think that's something that definitely should be kept in the back of people's head, but I wouldn't make, if I was a regulator or a legislator, I wouldn't make that like a bedrock principle for EV adaptation.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, there's never going to be, it's always going to be one's pulling the other, right? There's always one person pushing, or one part of the equation pushing and one part pulling. Or at least dragging the other one along. So trying to go for full 100% capacity to roll something like that out wouldn't be the right answer, but it's definitely worth thinking about. The Model T example is really interesting, except the Model T isn't driving the economy. So,
Well, and I think it's so funny because I think that's something that always gets on my nerves is when not so much regulators, because there are really different, trucks are regulated differently, we know that, but a lot of the legislators think that like, oh well, we could just throw trucks and cars in the same boat and there you go, I got all of them in there, but you can't. For exactly what you said, a commercial vehicle serves a vastly different purpose than a passenger vehicle does, and it does drive the economy. And so, yes, taking people out of cars and into buses or into trains, or in some cases even onto bikes, that is a completely different lift than, hey, we need to get as many, we need to get full zero emission vehicles, we need to get full electrification in commercial. It's like, you do eventually, yes, but be careful with your timing and your overly aggressive timelines. I would advise.
yeah, I mean that's a fair point. Again, it's the push and pull, right? I mean, I think everybody acknowledges that this is could be a very, very nice step into a positive push or positive function on the environmental situation. But it's kind of a race against time, right? How fast can we get there versus how fast is it logistically possible? What are you seeing on the EV side? I mean, I know you do a lot of work with EV in New York. Similar type of vibe on the other side of the coast.
It's very similar type of vibe here. I would say that I think actually one of the frustration, I would say fleets, in addition to the range anxiety, have two really big pieces of frustration. One is that the push is straight up EV, and they're not really focusing on some of these bridge fuels and bridge technologies as much, because I think those are solutions that really could work for a lot of fleets right now. I know some of the long haulers are very interested in hydrogen, but I know that a lot we're getting compressed natural gas, and we're happy with that. I know a lot have, it does go back to the California standard, the clean idle. They're very happy with those vehicles. And again, it's not just that vehicles don't last. This is not like, oh, I'm getting, a clean idle vehicle and that's going to be my vehicle for 20 years. Of course not. But
Right.
they're very happy with it now, and they feel like they're moving in the right direction, for sustainability, for the environment. And they don't necessarily want to hear something like, oh, in 2025, 2026, you're going to have to go electric, when they're like, well, why? And if there's if the clean idle technology is even better in 2025 or 2026, let me get another one of those, and then we could talk electric. And I think that's one of the frustrations. And I know, and this is something that we're working on with TTT and New York, is about this voucher program, because unlike California actually has a more lenient standard than New York does. New York, you have to scrap a vehicle, an older diesel vehicle, to get that voucher for the electric. You do not in California. So we're working with fleets to use the TTT exchange to process that transaction, which I think is going to solve some of those pain points for some of those fleets. But again, what's the scale there? And that's kind of the question. But there is also, there is the elephant in the room, which is the sky high diesel prices right now.
That's true.
And I know that in terms of where you sit, there are definitely some of these small fleets and owner operators that they're taking out loans and working capital just to fill up the tank, right?
Yeah, I mean, we keep a pretty good temperature check on the applications that we see. Typically on the startup side or the owner operator side, we do ask to see their bank statements, and I've seen some declines. Usually they're pretty cash intensive businesses. They've got nice reserves, but you could see those those truck stops and those fuel and like everything kind of like ticking down a little bit more than they're used to. Not to say that it's not still lucrative business by any means, but it's definitely hurt. We've not to take it into the TrueCore's perspective, but we've lost a couple deals where somebody made a decision that gas prices were too high, and they didn't want to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing that as well, and I'm seeing that too. And I mean, where you and I are recording this in late June here, but I could tell you the May certainly, and a little bit of April and a little bit of June. I mean, nobody was in buy mode. It was just like a lot of let's do what we can, but we're not gonna look to expand or grow or anything like that right now. And a big part of that was because of the fuel costs.
Right, right. I mean, luckily, trucking, for both of our sakes, I think, but trucking is still, lucrative industry. I mean, if you have the margins, I mean, one thing that we haven't talked about maybe for another time, but I have noticed on the freight boards and the scheduling that they're starting to price in like economic adjustments into their costs, which has historically not really been relevant or prevalent in trucking. So if gas pricing goes up, my load cost goes up, or how much I get paid goes up. So to cover those up.
No,
Factors.
I'm hearing that too, and I think one of the reasons for that is the prevalence of truck drivers and fleets on social media. To be able to utilize social media to gain some semblance of bargaining power, if you will, to say that, in large numbers that, hey, this is not acceptable. The rates have to adjust to the economic realities that we live in. And that's important. I mean, I think it's sort of how do you keep the economy afloat? How do you avoid a recession? Is everybody contributing? Everybody sort of making sure that we're in this together and that what needs to move can move. And I think that I wonder though if the OEMs can take a hint from that and market these EVs a little bit better to make it a little bit more palatable instead of just, oh, it's regulation, oh, it's pain, oh, it's this. To market some of these, safety features and build in the actual fuel savings over time instead of just, oh, hey, you're dropping a lump sum, but then it's going to, it's going to make you whole in the end. It's like, well, build it out from the beginning, market it in the beginning. You might see some opinions change there.
Yeah, I think the strongest point that you made that I think is really relevant for the trucking community today is that, I mean, I hear all the time on my side, I think you might as well, but they say that the construction, industrial, trucking world from an internet basis is about 5 years behind the consumer.
Yes.
5 to 10 years behind the consumer. So what were you and I doing 5 years ago on the internet? Social media was starting to ramp up, but definitely not to the extent that is today. But 5 to 10 years ago, we started to get a voice online, started developing our personal brand, like all that good stuff. And that's where the truckers are today. They've found a place where they can vent their frustrations, not just, on the radio to their buddies down, like as they're driving down the highway, So it's, they're going to become more vocal. And I think that's a great thing for the industry.
I totally agree. And that's, your numbers are exactly what we hear and see. It's, on the low end, 5 years behind, on the higher end, closer to like 7 years behind. But I think that, I wonder if maybe that right there is something that the regulators, particularly in California and New York, should factor in and say, all right, well, so where was Tesla 5 years ago or 7 years ago versus where is Tesla today? And how do we build models off of that to better understand where commercial is going to be, in 2027, 2030? I think that might actually serve everybody pretty well.
Yeah, definitely agree. It's a, I'll just say I'm happy that I'm not in the legislator's shoes right
now. That's what a lot of people are telling me here, at least here in New York. It's like, I'm glad I'm I'll work on it as much as I can, but I'm glad it's not my problem to solve,
Right.
type of thing.
Right.
The last thing I'm curious about, and again, this is Andrew and I are just talking, we're just speculating, we're not making any bold predictions here, but I'm curious where you think the resale value of electric is, because this is another one of the debates, conversations, whatever, that we have a lot here about what that secondary market is going to look like.
Yeah, it's, well, from a finance standpoint, it's going to be tough. Most resale values, or let's just call it appraisal values, are based off big, what is this sold for historically? How fast does it depreciate? What is this asset going to be worth in 1 year, 2 years, all the way to 6 years, depending on your term, right? Not many banks, not many lenders have had the luxury of pricing that out, especially on the secondary market. So yeah, OEM lists this truck for 150K, 250K, wherever they land on that spectrum. What is that really worth in a year? Like, if there is full adoption in the trucking community, then maybe it doesn't depreciate as fast. If you have to sell it to a very specific niche in California, New York, then the resale value is definitely not going to be there. So I know a lot of people are keeping an eye on the legislation. It's not specifically in California, New York, but across the nation, to help guide that factor. But the resale value, I mean, to not beat around the bush, at some point, as they catch up, 5 to 10 years, 5 to 7 years, as we just talked about, I think the resale value will match the diesel engines.
Interesting. I mean, that is definitely a relief to many, I think, because I think that was one of the, or I mean, it still is, but what you say makes a ton of sense. But that is one of the great unknowns, and I know somebody I was talking to was saying that, oh, well, maybe I'll just lease electric and see how that goes, and then another was saying, well, maybe I'll lease the electric, and then I'll look to buy it, but I'll like keep the battery and just sell the shell of the truck and then let the buyer buy their own battery, type of thing. I mean, I think that's people are concerned about the minerals for the batteries, and I understand that, but I also think people need to start thinking of, is the battery and the truck are these separate units? Is it like tractor trailer type thing, or is this like a package deal? And nobody has the answers to that. I'm just saying that, like, I think that's something that people need to keep in mind, because it's also one of the great unknowns. Right.
Well, another interesting point on that, I've heard that people are starting to separate those two. I think that is a slippery slope a little bit. Like, I've heard about warranties just on the battery itself. We'll replace it for life if you sign up for this $2,000 a month, like whatever it is, right? But also, I guess to counter that point, I drive a hybrid. I don't know what you drive, but from day one, that battery is degrading. Day one, it was perfect. It lasts me however many miles. Like, doesn't matter what that number is. We're now a year and a half in. That battery is not doing exactly what it did a year and a half ago. So it's an interesting point for this topic as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's just, I don't need to be an engineer to know that's how batteries work.
Right.
And it's just like, what exactly are we selling? I guess then it's sort of the two-pronged thing, right? For the new truck, what exactly is the life cycle there? And we know that in diesel, pre-COVID and supply chain problems, these fleets were not running these diesels crazy. It was, a couple of years and sell them. But, does the battery dynamic change that? Does it push back? Because I think there's a lot who say, well, this is going to push back the timeline and you can maintain it longer. But there's a possibility that that's not necessarily the case, at least specifically with the battery. Or maybe it is, but I think that's something that really needs to be discussed and studied, is what is the reasonable expectation for that battery life and how does that then affect how long you're going to hold on to the asset?
Right. In our world, it also affects essentially how long you're going to lend, right?
Right,
Because
right.
one of the key criteria right now is mileage. But why is it mileage? It's about the engine and how long it's going to last, like before you start having critical structural damage or downtime with your truck. We have no idea what that looks like in EV as of today.
Right, exactly. And then so it's like, well, if you're financing on a 5-year term, I'm just throwing basic numbers out there. If you're financing on a
Right.
5-year term and the battery's only good for 2.5, like, reason, like the way they need it to operate at 2.5, what are we doing here? What could possibly happen?
Oh, it's a fun time. It's a fun time.
um, so but right now, it's kind of in a holding pattern. You're not actually, nobody's applying to credit for any for electric vehicle or a facility upgrade or something like that.
I've seen the infrastructure come through. People are applying for manufacturing equipment, for battery assembly, for those types of things in order to,
Okay.
like, more of the OEM side, preparing for the wave or starting to generate the wave. I have not seen a ton of applicants, at least on my side. I can't speak for the industry as a whole, of actual EV vehicles.
Well, that's really interesting. So that kind of answer, or we're putting the puzzle together, and the answer is trucking kind of wants to follow the infrastructure. Really, it seems to me then that at least those who are going to be first are,
Right.
let's get the infrastructure, let's make sure the infrastructure is done, and then we'll start with the vehicle purchases instead of, hey, I want to put these vehicles in and I could figure out the rest, or I assume the government will figure out the rest or whatever. I think it's hey, let's do what we need. Let's build up our capabilities, and then we could buy the vehicles.
Yeah. I mean, just in a world where we say, all right, everybody's EV, what happens today? A driver from Los Angeles, where I am, all the way, he gets to Vegas. Let's just say he can get there off one thing. Now, maybe there's 100 charging stations, but there's 10,000 truckers stopping in Vegas tonight. What happens?
That, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is another one of those massive, massive questions. And then I guess there's and of course, and we talk about this on stream all the time. We already have a parking crisis in this country.
Right.
It's and I know Secretary Buttigieg really wants to tie the two together. I know, Congress kind of pushed back on it. We don't need to go through the whole bureaucratic mess, but basically, I know there are those who would like them to be tied together. Right now, it doesn't look like it's going to happen. And the fact is, if we don't have enough parking, the parking that exists, it's not going to have enough charging. And then, let's do. I mean, you have to play these scenarios out on paper, in order to approve somebody. So now all of a sudden, there are all these truckers, not enough charging. What happens with hours of service?
Right.
Now what happens with drive time? Does a driver lose 3 days because they have to wait online to, like, what? And then again, these are not throw your hands in the air. These are solvable problems, but you need to be thinking about them to be solving them. And I think that's sort of where we're stuck right now is, I guarantee you no regulator is talking about how a charging could affect hours of service. There's no way.
I mean, part of the beauty of trucking, I mean, I think the truckers themselves would agree, is kind of the freedom. If you need to go from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, there is a clear shot. But if you need to stop in, I don't know, Bakersfield first, you can deviate. You can go that way. But now if you have to think about, oh, there's no charging station in Bakersfield, I got to get to Vegas, maybe you don't take that half load, or maybe you don't take that detour, whatever it is.
Right.
It's powerful. It's a powerful problem.
Exactly. And this is really the ideal time, I think, for truckers to be saying that, because the nation finally understands the costs of supply chain
Mm,
flare-ups, for lack of a better word. I think the American consumer finally has an understanding of how their product gets to them or how it doesn't get to them, and what needs to be factored in to build a healthy supply chain.
right. Right.
Awesome.
Yeah. Again, glad I'm not in the shoes.
Seriously, right? But as people still do need to go ahead and purchase their diesel trucks and trailers and all that equipment, certainly utilize TrueCore Capital for your financing needs. We're going to have a link in the description, in case you do need financing. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us today. Always a great conversation.
Yes. Thank you, Zach. Good combo.
If you like the content you see, please subscribe, and we'll see you next time on stream.